Do you remember the dinners from Grandma's old cookbook? Quick, simple, and made with love? They filled the table fast, but they filled something deeper too. When did fast stop meaning home? Ham and applesauce might sound fancy today, but back in the day it was just something Grandma could throw together before the table was even set. Sliced ham went straight into a hot skillet, sometimes with just a dab of butter or the leftover fat from breakfast. A quick sear on each side was all it needed. Meanwhile, the applesauce, homemade if you had a backyard tree, canned if you were in a hurry, was warming on the back burner. This was dinner you could smell from the front porch. The saltiness of the ham played off the soft, tart sweetness of the apples in a way that felt balanced, simple, and oddly comforting. It was a meal for days when you were tired, when groceries were thin, or when you just needed something that felt familiar. And the best part? No oven. No long wait. Just a skillet, a spoon, and a little heat. Folks might not talk about ham and applesauce as a main course anymore, but for a generation raised on wartime thrift and flavor that did not waste time, this was a weeknight miracle. If you ever needed proof that sweet and salty go hand in hand, here it is. There were two things nearly every kitchen had back then: creamed corn and hot dogs. When both of them landed in the same skillet, dinner was practically done. This was the kind of meal Grandma made when time was short and kids were restless. She would slice the hot dogs into little coins and toss them into a buttered pan until they browned just right around the edges. Then came the creamed corn, thick, sweet, and silky from the can. It all got mixed together into a bubbling, golden mess that looked questionable to some but tasted like warm security. You could eat it on its own, spoon it over bread, or mop it up with the last slice of toast from breakfast. Nobody called it gourmet, but everyone called it dinner. It filled your belly, cleaned out the pantry, and gave you one less thing to worry about. And somehow, it was the meal that lingered in memory more than any roast or fancy casserole. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was how fast it came together. Or maybe it was just that it tasted better when you were young, hungry, and too impatient to wait for something fancier. Peanut butter and bacon sounds like a dare today, but to Grandma, it was just Tuesday lunch. This was a sandwich born in the tail end of the Great Depression and carried proudly into the next decade by people who knew how to stretch every ingredient. She would fry up strips of bacon until they crackled, drain them on the same paper towel she used all week, then lay them across a thick spread of peanut butter on white sandwich bread. That was it. No lettuce, no tomato, no fancy mayonnaise, just salt, fat, protein, and speed. Kids loved the crunch. Grown-ups loved how it filled you up without burning through the grocery budget. And for something so strange-sounding, it just worked. The warmth of the bacon softened the peanut butter slightly, and the two came together like old friends who had nothing in common but always got along. Sometimes she would add a second slice of bread, but often it was open-faced and served cold. It was portable, practical, and surprisingly satisfying. And in homes where time was short and mouths were many, that counted for everything. You might laugh at it now, but one bite would probably bring it all back. This one came straight out of the open the pantry and hope for a miracle school of cooking. Scrambled eggs with canned chili was never in any cookbook, but it made it onto plates across America faster than most 5-ingredient dinners. Grandma would beat a few eggs with whatever milk she had left, toss them in a skillet, and stir them just until they were barely set. Then came the chili, straight from the can, full of beans and spice and a little bit of mystery meat. It would warm right on top of the eggs until the kitchen smelled like a diner on a slow afternoon. A few slices of toast on the side, maybe a wedge of cheese if you were lucky, and you had yourself a meal. It was hearty, messy, and completely satisfying. No one asked what brand the chili was or whether the eggs were farm fresh. What mattered was that it was hot, filling, and on the table in 10 minutes. It was meals like this that made it possible to get through the rest of the week. And once you have eaten it once, you will understand why it never needed a recipe. Salmon patties with saltine crumbs were a classic end-of-the-week dinner, The kind of meal you made when the fridge looked sad and the meat was long gone. Canned salmon was a miracle in itself. Cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with enough protein to make you feel like you had not missed a step. Grandma would mix it up with crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, and maybe a sprinkle of onion or celery if there was any left. She would form them into small patties and fry them in the same pan that had seen 5 meals already. The result? Golden, crispy outsides with soft, savory centers. They had just enough flavor to make you forget they came from a can and not the sea. Served with peas or creamed corn, or just a dollop of mayonnaise on the side, it was the kind of humble meal that never needed applause. It showed up quietly, did its job, and vanished without complaint. But it left everyone full and just a little more hopeful. That is what dinner was supposed to do. Not impressed, not sparkle, just comfort. And that is exactly what these little salmon cakes delivered. Sloppy Joes had already earned their place in the American kitchen by the time Grandma figured out how to make them faster. Instead of hamburger buns, she grabbed slices of toast, whatever white sandwich bread was left in the bread box. Ground beef got tossed into the skillet with a little onion, then drowned in a quick mix of ketchup, mustard, and a pinch of sugar if you had it. No special seasonings, no packets, no fuss. Once the mixture was bubbling, it got spooned right over the toast and served just like that, open-faced, hot, and ready to fall apart in your hands. That was half the fun. It dripped, it stained your fingers, and it always tasted better the messier it was. This was a dinner for families who were too tired to sit proper but still wanted to eat together. It was loud, quick, and honest. And even though it came from a time of tight belts and short patience, it tasted like something you might pay good money for at a diner today. That is the thing about Sloppy Joe toast. It always fed more than just your stomach. Bologna and Egg Scramble was the go-to dinner when breakfast never quite happened and lunch was already a blur. It started with slices of bologna, thick and pink and curled at the edges, hitting the hot pan with a sizzle. Grandma would brown them until they crisped at the edges, then crack in a few eggs and give it all a quick scramble. No measuring, no garnish, just protein and grease and flavor. Sometimes she would add a little shredded cheese if she had some, but it was not necessary. This was about getting food on the table without making it a project. The bologna gave the eggs a smoky, salty edge, and the eggs softened everything just enough to go down easy. Served in bowls, over toast, or straight from the skillet, no one ever walked away hungry. It was simple, dependable, and tasted a whole lot fancier than it had any right to. You could make it in 10 minutes, clean up in 5, and be done with the day before the sun went down. Some meals were special because they were rare. This one was special because it was always there. Creamed peas on buttered toast was one of those meals that whispered instead of shouted. It never tried to impress anyone. It was made for quiet nights, empty fridges, and long weeks. Grandma would melt a little butter in a pan, add canned peas, sometimes drained, sometimes not, and stir in milk and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it. Salt, pepper, maybe a dash of sugar if the peas were too sharp. Then she would ladle the warm, creamy mix over thick slices of buttered toast. It was soft, it was mild, it was the edible version of a warm blanket. Nobody bragged about it, and no one ever asked for seconds out loud. But the plate was always clean by the end. It was a meal that held your hand, quietly filled you up, and gave you the strength to keep going. In some homes, it was the only hot food all week, and even if you had fancier ingredients or a longer grocery list, you still came back to this because it made you feel like a kid again. Just peas and bread and thyme. That was more than enough. Quick tomato and rice soup was less of a recipe and more of a family habit. It started with canned tomato soup, the kind that came in a red and white can and waited patiently in your pantry for its moment. Instead of milk or water, Grandma would stir in leftover rice from the night before. Just a scoop or two, enough to bulk it up and stretch it across the whole table. The rice gave it body, the soup gave it flavor, and together they made something more than the sum of their parts. It simmered on the stove while she folded laundry or paid bills at the kitchen table. It was the smell that told you dinner was ready, not the clock. No one complained that it was simple. In fact, that was the point. You could top it with cheese, swirl in a bit of cream, or eat it plain with saltines on the side. Whatever the case, it went down smooth, warmed you up fast, and made a long day feel less heavy. It might not win any ribbons, but it won over every empty stomach it ever met. Grilled cheese and pineapple sandwiches were one of Grandma's best-kept secrets, the kind of meal that made you raise an eyebrow right before you fell in love with it. It started like any grilled cheese, with slices of bread and whatever cheese was available. But right before the second slice went on, she would place a canned pineapple ring right in the middle of the sandwich. Then it all went into the skillet with butter hissing underneath. The cheese melted, the pineapple softened, the bread crisped to a golden crunch. The end result? A sandwich that was both savory and sweet, crispy and juicy. It was like dinner and dessert in one bite, and it somehow worked better than anyone expected. She made it on Fridays, or on days when the pantry was almost bare, but the craving for something different was strong. The smell of warm pineapple and browned butter filled the house and lingered even after the dishes were done. Kids loved it. Grown-ups pretended they did not, until they asked for seconds. It was quick, clever, and full of unexpected joy. Just like her. This was not just a baked bean and hot dog dinner. This was the working family's answer to hunger, chaos, and a kitchen clock that never slowed down. Grandma would take a can of baked beans, thick, sweet, and molasses dark, and heat it slowly on the stove. Then came the franks, sliced into coins and tossed in until they plumped up like little balloons. Sometimes she would add a spoonful of brown sugar or a shake of mustard, but most nights she just stirred and served. It was hot, sticky, smoky, and completely effortless. The beans coated the franks like syrup over pancakes, and it went best with a buttered slice of toast or a side of cornbread if the oven was already warm. Kids would gobble it down in minutes. Grown-ups would sigh, eat quietly, and go back for seconds. It was the kind of stovetop magic that made do with what you had and somehow made it taste better than it should. You never forgot the smell. And even if you rolled your eyes when she made it, you would ask for it again once life got harder and you needed something easy. That is what made it a keeper. Cold dinners had a way of sneaking into the rotation, especially during sticky summers or long days when even boiling water felt like a chore. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were Grandma's way of keeping things simple but still making it look like she tried. She would scoop a big spoonful of cottage cheese onto a plate, nestle a golden peach half beside it, and top the whole thing with a maraschino cherry if she was feeling fancy. Some people used lettuce as a bed. Others just reached for a fork and got to work. It was creamy, sweet, and oddly refreshing, the kind of combination you only appreciate once you grow up and remember it out of nowhere. The peaches added just enough syrupy sunshine, and the cottage cheese made sure you did not go to bed hungry. It was also what she served when she wanted to eat light but still feed the whole house. This was not a dinner that tried to win over picky eaters. It was a dinner that said, "This is what we have, and it will do just fine." And somehow, it did. Not every meal needed heat or noise. Some just needed quiet. American goulash light was less of a recipe and more of a formula. Meat, pasta, and tomatoes in whatever shape you could get. Elbow macaroni was the go-to because it cooked fast and filled up the pot. Grandma would brown a little ground beef, drain off the grease, and toss it with stewed tomatoes straight from the can. No sauce, no simmering, no drama. Sometimes she added a bit of onion or garlic salt, but usually it was just whatever she had on hand. The pasta would soak up the tomato juice until it was soft and tangy, and the beef added just enough flavor to make it stick to your ribs. Served in bowls with a sprinkle of grated cheese, if you were lucky, it was dinner. Fast. It was not the baked casserole version you see in magazines. This was goulash stripped down to its bones, made for people who needed food on the table in 10 minutes or less. And the best part? It was good. Really good. No breadcrumbs, no baking dish, no long prep. Just one skillet, one spoon, and a whole lot of knowing what mattered. That is how Grandma cooked. Spam and cabbage was the kind of meal that did not sound like much but got the job done, and then some. Grandma would slice the Spam into thick chunks and toss it into a hot pan until the edges crisped and curled. Then came the shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the fat, softening in the salt and soaking up every bit of flavor. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar if she felt like balancing things out. That was it. No special tools, no hard steps. But the kitchen always smelled like something better than it should have. The cabbage turned silky. The Spam, golden and caramelized. You could eat it on its own or pile it over mashed potatoes or rice if you had extra. For many, it was a depression holdover. For others, it was just what you made when payday was still a few days away. It was salty, hearty, and fast. The holy trinity of Grandma's weekday dinners. And for all the jokes people made about Spam, no one left hungry. You might laugh at the idea now, but back then, this was dinner you could trust. Before we had Taco Tuesday, there were taco-style ground beef wraps, and they showed up whenever ground beef was on sale. Grandma would brown the beef in a skillet, toss in some chili powder, garlic salt, and maybe a spoonful of ketchup or tomato paste, then serve it up inside whatever bread she had around. Sometimes it was a tortilla, sometimes it was plain white sandwich bread folded in half. The seasoning was not store-bought, it was just whatever smelled right. Shredded lettuce, diced onions, or a sprinkle of cheese got added when there was time or leftovers from Sunday. These wraps were messy, fast, and full of flavor. The meat was soft and spicy. The bread was warm and soaked up all the juices. Kids would fold theirs tight and eat it in 2 bites. Adults would eat standing up by the sink, trying not to drop any. This was Tex-Mex before anyone called it that. Comfort food with no instructions and no fuss. Grandma just called it dinner. And somehow, it always hit the spot. Cheesy macaroni and egg scramble was one of those late-night meals that turned into a weeknight tradition. It started when there was leftover macaroni in the fridge, plain, boiled, and sitting cold in a bowl. Grandma would crack in some eggs, sprinkle a handful of shredded cheese, and toss it all into a buttered skillet. The eggs cooked fast, clinging to the pasta like a soft coat, while the cheese melted into every corner. A quick stir here, a little salt there, and dinner was done before the plates were even on the table. It looked like a mess. It tasted like magic. The noodles gave the scramble some bite, and the eggs made it feel like more than just leftovers. If there was ham or hot dog slices in the fridge, they got tossed in too. It was warm, filling, and cheap. 3 things every dinner needed to be. Nobody asked for it in a restaurant. But everyone remembered it once they moved out and had to make their own meals. That is the power of recipes like this. They live in your muscle memory, even when the recipe card is long gone. Pork chops with apples on toast was one of Grandma's best fancy in 5 minutes tricks. She would take a thin cut of pork, season it with salt and pepper, and pan-fry it in butter until golden brown and just cooked through. Meanwhile, she would warm up canned or stewed apples, sometimes spiced with cinnamon or cloves. A thick slice of toast would go down on the plate first, then the pork chop, and finally a generous spoonful of those sweet, soft apples on top. It looked like something you would get in a country diner, but it took less than 10 minutes in her kitchen. The toast soaked up the juices. The pork brought the savory. The apples added just enough sweetness to make it feel special. No one called it gourmet, but no one left a bite behind either. It was a clever mix of pantry staples and leftover odds and ends, dressed up just enough to make you sit a little straighter at the table. And it reminded you, even a 10-minute dinner could feel like something worth slowing down for. There is something about a fried bologna sandwich with yellow mustard that never really leaves you. Grandma would slice a thick round of bologna and toss it onto a hot skillet. As it browned, it would puff up in the center, curling into a little cup with crisp edges and sizzling sides. She would slap it onto a slice of white bread, smear on some yellow mustard, the real kind, tangy and bright, and fold it up like a letter you could eat. That was dinner. No side dish, no dessert, just a hot sandwich that hit the spot in less than 5 minutes. The smell of frying bologna was unmistakable. Part school lunch, part diner counter, part home. It was cheap, fast, and unforgettable. You might not see it on a dinner menu, but it fed generations of kids and kept more than a few households running when money ran thin. And if you ever had one fresh off the skillet, you probably still remember the first bite. Egg salad melts on English muffins were Grandma's way of stretching a dozen eggs across a week. She would boil a batch at the start of the week, mash them up with mayonnaise, mustard, a pinch of salt, and maybe some chopped celery if it was in the drawer. Then, when dinner time came and the fridge was looking bare, she would pull out a few English muffins, split them open, and pile on the egg salad. A slice of cheese went on top, American, cheddar, or whatever was left, and it all went under the broiler for a minute or two. The edges of the muffins crisped, the cheese bubbled, the egg salad warmed and got just the right kind of messy. It was not elegant, but it was real. It was food you could eat with one hand and clean up with the other, and it made a dozen eggs stretch a whole lot farther than you thought possible. Meals like this did not just feed people. They taught you how to make do, stay full, and carry on. The cheddar and tomato open-faced broil was the kind of dinner that always looked better than it had any right to. Grandma would take thick slices of sandwich bread, lay down a few rounds of fresh or canned tomato, and top it all with slabs of cheddar cheese. Then into the broiler it went, just long enough for the cheese to melt and bubble, with the edges crisping up like a grilled sandwich turned inside out. It was salty, juicy, and exactly what you needed when the pantry felt a little too empty. Some people added a shake of black pepper. Others spooned on a little mayonnaise before the cheese went on. It was flexible, forgiving, and always fast. You did not need a recipe, just a sense of timing and a hot oven. It fed kids after school. It filled up adults after work, and it made the house smell like someone was trying, even if it was just the toaster oven doing most of the work. That was Grandma's magic. She made 10-minute meals feel like home. Rice with butter and soy sauce was one of those dinners that made the most out of almost nothing. After the war, a lot of homes had rice in the pantry and not much else. Grandma would boil a pot, fluff it with a fork, and then stir in a generous pat of butter and just enough soy sauce to give it color and salt. It was not traditional, it was not fancy, but it did the job. The butter gave it richness, the soy sauce gave it depth, and together they turned a plain grain into something worth sitting down for. You could eat it on its own or serve it beside scrambled eggs, canned vegetables, or the last spoonful of meat from the night before. It was a filler, yes, but a warm, flavorful one that somehow tasted better the more you needed it. This dish was quiet comfort, the kind that showed up when no one else did and still managed to make you feel full. And that is why it stayed in rotation, long after things got better. Sometimes the best meals were the ones that asked for the least. There was something almost ceremonial about pan-fried potatoes and onions with an egg on top. Grandma would cube the potatoes, chop the onions, and let them sizzle in a cast-iron skillet until they were browned and crispy. The smell alone could carry through the whole house. At the very end, she would crack an egg right into the center and let it cook sunny side up, the yolk just soft enough to run a little when you cut into it. No meat, no toast, just 3 simple ingredients that together felt like more than enough. This was dinner for lean weeks, meatless Fridays, or long stretches between paychecks. The potatoes filled you up, the onions gave it flavor, and the egg brought everything together. It was hearty, honest, and completely satisfying. Served in a bowl or straight from the skillet, it made the kind of meal that slowed you down and reminded you to be grateful, even if all you had was a sack of potatoes and a few eggs left in the carton. These were meals that came from resourcefulness, not recipes, and somehow that always tasted better. Cornbread and buttermilk in a bowl might not sound like much, but it was a whole supper to folks who knew how to stretch $1. Grandma would crumble leftover cornbread into a dish, pour cold buttermilk right on top, and hand it over with a spoon. That was it. No cooking, no warming up. Just cold, tangy, crumbly simplicity. It was a Southern staple that made its way into kitchens all across America, especially during hot months or tight times. Some people added salt. Others stirred in a little honey. But most just ate it as it was, a strange but surprisingly filling meal that stuck with you. The cornbread soaked up the buttermilk, softening into something almost like a pudding. It was not meant to impress, just to nourish, and for a lot of families, it was all they needed at the end of a long day. It was cheap, it was easy, and most importantly, it got the job done. That is the kind of dinner that deserved a place in every old cookbook. Sardines on crackers with onion and mustard was never anyone's idea of a celebration, but it sure was dinner. On the nights when nothing was thawed, the stove stayed cold, and Grandma was too tired to fuss. This is what came out. The sardines came straight from the tin, laid out on saltines or toast rounds. A sliver of raw onion went on top, followed by a little mustard, just enough to punch it up. It was salty, it was sharp, and it was surprisingly satisfying. You could eat 3 or 4 and call it a night, or serve them with a boiled egg and call it fancy. They were high in protein, low in cost, and required zero prep. Lent, lean budgets, or hot summers, this was a go-to. Kids turned up their noses. Adults cleaned their plates. It was not glamorous, but it worked. And in homes where nothing went to waste and every bite counted, that was enough. You might not crave it now, but if you grew up with it, you never really forgot. Egg noodles with butter and garlic salt were Grandma's way of saying, "I know we are broke, but I will still feed you something warm." Boil the noodles, drain them fast, and throw in a chunk of butter while they were still steaming. Then came the garlic salt. Never garlic powder, never fresh cloves. Garlic salt was always the trick. Just a few shakes, stirred in with a wooden spoon, and the whole bowl came to life. It was buttery, salty, and smelled like comfort. You could eat it straight or add peas, chopped ham, or a sprinkle of Parmesan if you had any. But it did not need much. This was a meal that expected nothing and gave everything. It filled the house with warmth and the table with quiet. There was no story behind it, no secret ingredient, no hand-me-down recipe, just butter, garlic salt, and thyme. Sometimes that was all you needed. Hamburger crumble over mashed potatoes felt like a backwards meatloaf, and that was exactly the point. Instead of baking everything together, Grandma browned the ground beef in a skillet, sometimes with onions, sometimes with just salt and pepper. Then she would whip up instant mashed potatoes or use leftovers from the night before. The beef went right on top, hot, greasy, and just barely seasoned, soaking into the potatoes like gravy. It was fast. It was easy. It was the kind of dinner you made when nobody could agree on anything but they all needed to eat. No ketchup glaze, no breadcrumbs, just the bare bones of a meat and potatoes meal. It was humble, but filling, messy, but comforting. And every now and then she would throw some peas on top or a handful of cheese. But even plain, it worked. It always worked. In homes where food had to stretch, this was one of the smartest tricks in the book. Leftover meat sandwiches with gravy dip were Sunday's second chance. After the roast was done and the big meal was over, Grandma would wrap up the meat and save the drippings. By Monday night, those cold slices went onto sandwich bread, sometimes plain, sometimes toasted, and dipped into reheated gravy like it was a 5-star French dip. No one called it leftovers. They called it dinner. The meat did not need to be warm. The gravy did the work. It softened the bread, wrapped the roast in warmth, and turned what might have been a dry slice of beef into something worth remembering. Some families used pork. Others used ham. It did not matter. What mattered was that it was fast, smart, and made yesterday's meal last just a little longer. Grandma was good at that. Tomato juice and saltine cracker plates were a real thing, and not just when someone was sick. It was a quick supper, especially in the summer or when the kitchen felt too hot to touch. A cold glass of tomato juice poured straight from the can sat beside a stack of saltines and a wedge of cheese. That was the whole plate. No pan, no oven, no prep. Just cold, salty, sharp, and simple. It was a meal you could put together with one hand while holding a baby in the other. Some people dunked the crackers into the juice. Others spread the cheese and took slow bites. It was not much, but on nights when time was short and appetites were small, it was enough. And there was something oddly satisfying about it. Something clean, cool, and just familiar enough to bring a little peace to the end of the day. Minute steak with ketchup glaze was a favorite when Grandma needed to make dinner fast but still wanted it to feel like something special. She would pull out a thin cut of beef. Sometimes it was actually labeled minute steak. Other times it was just the least expensive cut sitting in the butcher's case. She would heat a skillet until it was almost smoking, toss the steak in with a little oil or butter, and sear both sides until it browned and sizzled. That alone would have been enough, but Grandma liked to give it a little extra. She made a glaze from plain ketchup and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. If she had a bit of sugar or vinegar, she might toss that in too, just to give it a little zing. It would bubble up right there in the pan, coating the steak in a sticky, tangy sauce that clung to the edges and caramelized just enough. Served with mashed potatoes or on plain sandwich bread, it was the closest thing you got to steak night without the steakhouse. It came together in minutes, fed everyone full, and left just one pan to clean. That glaze? It made it magic. Oven-broiled ham and cheese on rye was Grandma's way of making fast food feel like real food. She would pull out slices of rye bread, sometimes fresh, sometimes a little dry, and line them up on a baking sheet. Deli ham came next, folded neatly or just torn straight from the package. Then she laid down thick slices of Swiss cheese, the kind that bubbled up when it melted and turned brown around the corners. Into the broiler it went for just a few minutes. You had to watch it close. Blink too long and it would burn. But when it was done just right, the cheese was molten, the rye was crisp, and the ham was warmed through with that perfect salty edge. The smell filled the whole kitchen. Kids came running. Adults stopped what they were doing. It was hot, fast, and easy to eat with your hands. Some people added a smear of mustard. Others topped it with a tomato slice or pickles. But most of the time, it needed nothing at all. It was simple food that felt like a treat, the kind of meal that made an ordinary evening feel a little more special. Leftover rice with creamed spinach was one of those pantry meals that turned odds and ends into something filling, warm, and fast. You scooped leftover rice into a skillet, stirred in canned creamed spinach, and added a splash of milk or cheese if you had any left. Everything cooked together until hot, and that was dinner. It was creamy, salty, and just filling enough to count when there was not much else in the cupboard. These little skillet meals showed up in old cookbooks because they stretched groceries, made dinner happen fast, and kept families full during lean times. You could eat it plain, add black pepper, or even crack an egg on top if you wanted to feel fancy, but most folks just scooped it onto a plate and called it a night. This meal did not take much: leftovers, canned greens, and a little creativity, and somehow it got everyone fed. Funny how these quick, practical dinners stick with you long after times get easier. Garlic-scented, spicy, and elegantly minimal, this Italian treasure draws hungry fans with its impressive simplicity. 10-minute pasta aglio e olio soared in popularity thanks to its swift cooking time, making it ideal for busy households yearning for full-bodied flavor. Historians trace its roots to Naples, where garlic, oil, and chili flakes found their way into countless frugal suppers, proving that even minimal ingredients can create culinary magic. Enthusiasts often joke that this one-pot wonder is proof you don't need a full Italian culinary degree to impress guests, though precision in cooking pasta al dente remains key. Simplicity and accessibility shine through as garlic-infused olive oil blankets each strand, introducing a subtle heat that blends beautifully with the starchy richness. Nostalgia lingers because generations have embraced it as an homage to rustic Italian peasant cooking, where fancy sauces take a back seat to wholesome foundations. For those keeping an eye on speed, a 10-minute cook time makes this enticing for weeknight dinners, unexpected guests, or even late-night cravings. Long before store-bought bread was an everyday staple, cornmeal was the backbone of many working-class meals. Cheap, shelf-stable, and endlessly versatile, it found its way into countless recipes, none more practical than corn dodgers. These simple golden brown dumplings were either fried to crisp perfection or baked until firm, then served with a drizzle of syrup or a pat of butter. Corn dodgers were a direct descendant of Depression-era survival cooking, when wheat flour was too expensive for daily use. Cornmeal, on the other hand, was affordable and widely available, especially in the South and Midwest. Mixed with a little water, salt, and sometimes a splash of milk, it formed a dough sturdy enough to hold its shape in the frying pan. The result was a crispy on the outside, tender on the inside bite of pure comfort. Paired with a bit of molasses or honey, whatever was on hand, it became a meal that kids actually looked forward to. Some families made them dense and chewy, while others leaned toward a lighter, almost hush-puppy-like texture. However they were served, one thing was certain. Corn Dodgers proved that even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something satisfying. No frills, no waste, just good, honest food. Stuffed peppers. Forget those boring pre-made things you see at the grocery store because stuffed peppers are here to save the day. We're talking about the beautiful bell peppers Grandma made on Thanksgiving. Vibrant red, yellow, or orange peppers are hand-picked and carefully hollowed out and then stuffed with a flavorful mixture of fluffy rice, seasoned ground meat, and your choice of chopped vegetables. Once stuffed, these peppers are baked to perfection until they are tender and crisp. Now, this isn't just a casual meal. Whipping up a stuffed pepper might make you feel like a master chef in the kitchen. It's also a great way to use up leftover rice and ground meat. Bonus points. If you use their visual appeal to trick your children into getting their daily dose of veggies. Yeah, the little ones don't really go for the green peppers on the table, but they might just love these stuffed peppers. You might even add some cheese to top it off. Unfortunately, it is one of those dishes that has faded from many dinner tables. For generations, baked cod was a dependable, no-fuss dinner, particularly in coastal and New England households. Light, flaky, and mild in flavor, cod was one of the most affordable fish available, making it a practical choice for families looking to put a nutritious meal on the table without overspending. Topped with a crisp breadcrumb and herb crust, this dish was both simple and satisfying. Proof that great cooking didn't need to be complicated. Cod's popularity was tied to its abundance. Throughout much of the 20th century, fresh or frozen cod was readily available at grocery stores and fish markets, and it didn't require elaborate preparation. A coating of breadcrumbs, butter, and fresh herbs locked in moisture while creating a crunchy, golden brown topping. Baked rather than fried, this dish had a lighter texture, making it a favorite among those who wanted something hearty without being heavy. So why did it disappear? Overfishing led to shortages, making cod more expensive, and as frozen fish sticks and pre-breaded fillies flooded supermarkets, many home cooks stopped preparing fish from scratch. Next on our list, we have boiled beans with garlic, which was an incredible staple across Europe, especially among monks and peasants. While peasants liked it because it was one of the few affordable things that they could get, monks liked them because of the sheer simplicity and health benefits. It kind of makes me feel really bad about how much unnecessary junk I eat when I do videos like this. These beans were one of the primary legumes that would be grown in medieval fields, and one of the most common ones were fava beans. These had become pretty native to the Old World, and they were even older than much of the beans we use today, like pinto, kidney, or black beans. Fava beans were incredibly resistant and tough, and they could work through the winter very well. They also did amazing whenever you would mix them in with garlic. It was one of the most affordable seasoning plants, and it could grow in climates that were otherwise too rough to support much crop growth. People kept it for medicinal purposes, as a flavoring, and as a last resort meal too. It was very common for Italian dishes in that era to feature sage, olive oil, and garlic as primary ingredients in most dishes. Monastic communities also relied on boiled beans and garlic as it became a particularly good friend in their endeavor to sustain meatless diets forever. Fried canned spaghetti and cheese was the dinner you threw together when there was not much left in the fridge and your stomach was growling. You would open up a can of leftover spaghetti, sauce and all, and toss it straight into a hot skillet. As it fried, the sauce thickened, the noodles crisped up around the edges, and everything smelled just good enough to pass for a proper meal. Then you sprinkled shredded cheese over the top, let it melt, and scraped it onto a plate. That was dinner. It came from old cookbooks full of clever ways to stretch leftovers and make canned food feel less like survival and more like comfort. It was salty, cheesy, crispy in the right places, and ready in under 10 minutes. Most folks ate it standing by the stove or while leaning over the kitchen table because that is how those quick meals always went. It was simple, but it filled you up. Funny how a can of spaghetti and some cheese could turn into something worth remembering. Crisp bacon, juicy tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce layered between slices of toasted bread might seem ordinary, yet they form a timeless favorite that transcends culinary fads. Often referred to as the old-fashioned BLT, this sandwich exemplifies the essence of speed and convenience, delivering a hearty meal with minimal preparation time. Culinary historians trace its lineage to early 20th century American diners, where bacon, lettuce, and tomato combined to create a balanced combination of savory, fresh, and tangy flavors. Some enthusiasts humorously claim that BLT stands for Better Lunch Triumph, reflecting its universal appeal and simple construction. Though easy to assemble, this sandwich boasts complex layers of taste and texture. The smoky crispness of bacon, paired with refreshing lettuce and the natural sweetness of a vine-ripened tomato, culminates in a harmonious bite that satisfies almost any midday craving. Nostalgia emerges each time it appears on a plate, as countless childhood memories revolve around that first crunchy mouthful. Its accessibility means that even cooks with limited time or confidence can excel at preparing this familiar treat. In the Appalachian Mountains, resourcefulness was a way of life. When fresh food wasn't always guaranteed, families learned how to make the most of what they had, and that's where soured corn soup came in. This dish started with dried corn that had been left to ferment slightly, giving it a tangy depth of flavor. Simmered with onions and a chunk of fat back, it transformed into a rich, hearty soup that was as practical as it was unique. Corn was the backbone of Appalachian cooking, grown in backyard gardens and stored for winter months. Allowing it to sour slightly wasn't a mistake. It was a method passed down for generations, a natural way to enhance flavor when refrigeration wasn't an option. Fatback, a common cut of cured pork, added just enough richness to make the dish feel substantial, while onions provided a little sweetness to balance out the tang. This wasn't the kind of soup you'd find in a restaurant, but for mountain families, it was a familiar and comforting meal. Some grew up eating it with cornbread on the side, others with a spoon straight from the pot. The ground beef veggie stew is the perfect combination of simple ingredients and a big flavor. This dinner dish is a budget-friendly and nutritious dinner option made with ground beef and a variety of vegetables. Plus, it's a great way to use up any leftover vegetables you might have hanging out in your fridge. You can customize this stew to your liking. Throw in some chopped potatoes for extra starch, or add a splash of your favorite hot sauce for a kick. Ground beef. Veggie stew is a classic comfort food that's easy to make, but let's be honest, it's vanishing from our tables because it can't compete with the modern options. You know, like the Crunch Wrap Supreme from Taco Bell. I bet Taco Bell doesn't remind you of your grandma and your cousins, though. Before plant-based eating became trendy, hearty vegetarian dishes like this one were a practical necessity. Creamy wild rice and mushroom casserole was a staple in Midwestern and Northern kitchens, especially during the colder months. Packed with earthy flavors and a rich, velvety texture, it was a comforting dish that felt just as satisfying as any meat-based meal. Wild rice, despite its name, isn't actually rice. It's a highly nutritious aquatic grain native to North America. Indigenous tribes harvested it for centuries, and by the mid-20th century, it had found its way into everyday cooking. Though slightly more expensive than white rice, its nutty flavor and chewy texture made it worth the price. Combined with mushrooms, one of the most affordable and widely available vegetables, this dish was both economical and deeply flavorful. A creamy sauce, often made with milk, butter, and a touch of sherry, tied everything together, creating a casserole that was rich yet wholesome. As convenience foods surged in popularity, canned cream of anything soup replaced homemade sauces, and wild rice was increasingly swapped for cheaper, quicker cooking grains. Over time, this once-loved casserole became a relic of an era when scratch cooking was the norm. Cabbage and onion soup was a medieval recipe that's pretty much stayed consistent with how we have it today. It was something that involved a watery, thin soup made out of spices, water, and some aromatics, and brought to a boil gradually. This would be done in earthen pots over a campfire, and it was one of the most perfect things to have during winter. While the preparation is largely the same across several centuries, the convenience isn't. As time went on, we obviously developed many things to cope with the long and harsh winter months, but on the flip side of things, when it was medieval times, people really just died in the winters, mostly out of hunger. Crops simply would not last, would not sprout in time. Some of the crops would fail, the land may simply go barren, or you may just not have damaged crops from rodents. Any one of these uncontrollable, unpredictable circumstances could essentially just ruin your entire year. Cabbage was important because it was very easy to store in the winter. As far as the nutrition goes, this is pretty okay when it comes to making sure you get everything you need. Comparatively, it was a lot better than other kinds of soups because it could be made very easily. The more convenient it was to make a dish, the more it would be preferred among the people, especially if it was very easy to grow it. Cabbage could also be used to make a lot of different kinds of things, so it was always worth it to invest in them. Onions were a very reliable vegetable because they were one of the most essential flavorings. The food back then was typically bland, and they didn't have the means to make it any tastier, but stuff like this helped a lot. Sardines on rye with onion and mustard was the kind of dinner that proved you could survive on pantry food and still eat something with bite. You opened a can of sardines, layered them cold onto slices of rye bread, and topped the whole thing with sliced onion and spicy mustard. That was dinner. It was salty, briny, sharp, and came together in minutes without a stove or oven in sight. This meal showed up in old cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards for one reason: it worked. Sardines were cheap, packed with protein, and lasted forever in the cupboard. Rye bread had enough bite to hold its own, and the mustard gave everything a sharp kick that kept it from feeling too plain. You ate it open-faced, with a fork and knife if you felt proper, or just with your hands when time was short. It was quick, practical, and oddly satisfying, even when the grocery budget was running on empty. Funny how the simplest pantry meals stuck with us, long after times got easier. A staple of potlucks and holiday gatherings, deviled egg redux breathes new life into a venerable classic. Early references to deviled eggs date back to ancient Rome, although the term deviled gained traction in 18th century Britain to describe spiced dishes. The modern spin often features tangy additions like Dijon mustard or a hint of vinegar, ensuring a zesty bite that balances the inherent creaminess of the yolk mixture. Culinary historians note that mayonnaise-based fillings became popular in the mid-1900s, appealing to a generation seeking straightforward, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Even home cooks pressed for time can whip them together in minutes. Simply boil, peel, halve, and blend. With minimal ingredients and easy assembly, these bite-sized treats perfectly combine speed and convenience. Their portability contributes to their enduring popularity, whether they appear at a casual brunch or a formal dinner. While the nostalgic factor remains strong, variations continue to emerge, showcasing unexpected garnishes like smoked paprika or crumbled bacon. Some folks joke that deviled eggs disappear faster than free donuts on a Monday morning, testifying to their irresistible charm. Mid-century America had a love affair with convenience, and nothing sold homemakers on a recipe faster than a catchy advertising campaign. In the 1960s, Wesson Oil promoted a dish that promised flavor, affordability, and, of course, a little Wessonality. It started with ground beef, one of the most budget-friendly proteins of the era, mixed with canned green beans and tomato soup, then topped with a generous handful of crushed potato chips. A little crunch, a little sauce, and a whole lot of practicality. Wessonality Surprise was designed for speed and efficiency. No complicated steps, no long cooking times, just a few pantry staples thrown together and baked into something that resembled a casserole. Canned green beans, already a staple in American kitchens, made the dish feel like a balanced meal, while the condensed tomato soup added a rich, slightly sweet tang. For families in the 60s, this kind of cooking was about making every dollar count. It was fast, it was filling, and thanks to Wesson's marketing, it became one of many quirky ad-driven meals that defined a generation of home cooking. A little strange? Maybe. But for busy families, it worked. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Rabbit stew is pretty self-explanatory. It's, well, rabbit stew, you know? I'm just kidding. It was a lot different from the stews we might be used to seeing today or even 50 to 60 years ago. Hunting wild game such as rabbits was how people lived off of the land, and making these stews would ensure enough food to last the day and give everyone 2 or 3 square meals. What people would do is add as many herbs, aromatics, and vegetables as they could. They took a very different approach to cooking. Some of these spices, like cumin or black pepper powder, may not necessarily have gone the best with rabbit stew. They were still added for any perceived medicinal benefits, though, like digestion and gut health. Back then, people were so used to eating whatever was available or whatever would keep them full longer. If it would taste good, that would be even better, but something tasting good was never a priority. Hunting rabbits was something everyone, from kids to adults, would be involved in, and villages and communities would set out traps for miles to capture as much game as they could. In culinary circles, shrimp scampi often conjures images of sophisticated restaurants, yet it can be crafted in a flash at home without fuss. Earning the moniker speedy, this streamlined version harnesses fresh shrimp, garlic, butter, and lemon to produce a dazzling entree in mere minutes. Historical records indicate that the term scampi originally referred to small lobsters known as langoustines in Italy. But American cooks embraced shrimp for a more accessible twist on the classic approach. Even minimalists find it gratifying. A swift sauté brings out succulent textures while blending buttery richness with citrus tang. Devotees consider it an ideal solution when time is scarce, but flavor must shine. Some playfully note that it keeps dinner guests from scuttling off early, thanks to its irresistible aroma. Indeed, experts praise shrimp as a great source of lean protein, and with modern supply chains, it remains widely available. Because ingredients are straightforward and easy to obtain, this recipe demonstrates that culinary elegance doesn't require intricate steps or hours of work. Served over pasta or alongside crusty bread, the warm, garlicky sauce appeals to both connoisseurs and casual diners. Hot dog and Velveeta quesadillas were a dinner shortcut that showed up when there was no time and even less energy to cook. You sliced hot dogs, laid them into a tortilla with chunks of Velveeta cheese, folded it over, and tossed the whole thing in a hot skillet until the cheese melted and the tortilla crisped. That was dinner. It took less than 10 minutes, filled you up, and made the best of whatever was left in the fridge. Old cookbooks and family recipe boxes leaned on meals like this because they were fast, cheap, and comforting. The salty hot dogs, gooey cheese, and crispy tortilla made this simple dinner feel like more than the sum of its parts. You could dip it in ketchup, mustard, or just eat it plain, but either way, it was satisfying. Families on tight budgets and tight schedules loved meals like this. They stretched groceries, came together fast, and kept everyone full. Funny how a tortilla, some cheese, and a hot dog could feel like enough when the pantry looked bare. At a glance, it looked like fried chicken on a stick. But take one bite, and the secret was out. There wasn't a shred of chicken in sight. In the 1960s, when poultry prices soared, working-class families in industrial cities like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit turned to a clever alternative: skewered, breaded, and fried pork or veal, known as city chicken. The name was a bit of a joke. Chicken was considered a luxury in certain areas, but pork and veal? Those were cheap, especially in regions with a strong meatpacking industry. But appearance mattered, and with a little ingenuity, cubed cuts of meat were threaded onto wooden skewers, giving the illusion of a drumstick. Once dredged in flour, dipped in egg wash, and coated in breadcrumbs, it was pan-fried until golden brown and crispy. Some families took it a step further, baking the skewers in a bit of broth for extra tenderness. Eastern European immigrants had been making versions of it since the early 20th century, and by the 1960s it was a staple at Sunday dinners and potlucks. It might not have been real chicken, but in a time when stretching a dollar mattered more than labels, it didn't need to be. Back in the 1950s, the Divan Parisian restaurant at Chatham Hotel in New York City gave birth to its signature dish, the chicken divan casserole. This mouth-watering dish soon found its way to all our homes, and I'm not complaining. It's made of tender chicken pieces nestled amongst vibrant green broccoli florets in a rich and creamy sauce, topped with a generous layer of melty cheese and a sprinkle of crispy breadcrumbs. The chef who leaked this recipe out to the public really took one for the team, and we can never thank him enough. It's the perfect combination of protein, veggies, and all the cheesy goodness your heart desires. Just maybe pair it with a side salad to pretend you're being healthy. Chicken divan casserole is the retro dish of every cheese lover's dreams, and you know what that calls for? A comeback. It's a classic at throwback parties, but you don't really need an excuse to cook this up. A typical Tuesday night works too. The word Maslin actually ends up coming from mestillon in Old French, which means to mix, and that's exactly what Maslin bread is. If you wanted an idea of what a medieval mixed loaf would look like, then look no further. It was very common to see this in England, France, and the Low Countries, especially between 1000 to 1500 years. Maslin was one of the most common kinds of bread for a specific reason, and this is actually because the climate was decently different in medieval times. Wheat was something that was born in more humid climates, so it struggled in northern and upland areas. Rye was a lot more reliable, on the other hand. It was known for also producing a darker bread that would keep you full for longer. People would get whatever wheat they had, mix it with rye, and get this loaf that was dense from rye but fluffy and soft from the wheat. It was a very interesting kind of loaf, really, and while we have several mixed grain breads in today's time, this was one of the easiest ways to spice up your daily routine back then. Before slow cookers and instant meals, there was Fricasy, a dish that turned simple ingredients into something extraordinary. This creamy chicken stew had roots in European cooking, but became a homecoming dinner favorite in American kitchens, especially in the South and Midwest. It was rich, comforting, and made the most of what was available. Chicken fricassee was the perfect example of resourceful cooking. In the days when whole chickens were bought instead of pre-cut parts, every bit was used. The meat was gently simmered in a velvety sauce made from broth, butter, and cream, creating a dish that felt indulgent without being expensive. Paired with dumplings or rice, it was a filling meal that stretched to feed a crowd. What made fricassee special was its balance between rustic and refined. Unlike fried or roasted chicken, this method kept the meat exceptionally tender, absorbing the sauce's deep flavors. Some families added carrots and peas, while others preferred a touch of sherry for extra depth. But no matter the variation, it was a dish meant to be ladled generously and served with warm, crusty bread. So why did it disappear? As boneless, skinless chicken breasts became the norm, slow-cooked dishes like this fell out of favor. Salmon and canned pea toasts were how you made pantry food look halfway fancy when the clock and your energy ran out. You took canned salmon, mashed it with mayonnaise, stirred in some peas, and spread it thick over hot toast. That was dinner. It sounds simple now, but when fresh meat was scarce or paychecks were tight, this was the kind of meal that kept families going. The old cookbooks were filled with little tricks like this, ways to stretch canned goods into something that almost felt special. Salmon from a can never fooled anyone, but the crunch of toast and the soft peas made it oddly satisfying. You might even see a sprinkle of pepper or a squeeze of lemon if someone was feeling bold. It came together fast, filled you up, and for those 10 minutes in the kitchen, it made you feel like you still had control over dinner. Sometimes that is all anyone needed. Once a humble side dish favored in classic steakhouse settings, garlic butter mushrooms combine convenience with old-fashioned appeal. Across mid-century homes, mushrooms were praised for their distinctive earthiness and ability to soak up flavors. Though some comedic observers quip that these little sponges find redemption in enough melted butter and garlic. Indeed, this swift recipe capitalizes on minimal ingredients, mushrooms, butter, garlic, and herbs, to create a robust union of savory undertones and tender texture. From stovetop to table, the entire process unfolds in minutes, making it a valuable option for busy families balancing packed schedules. Experts note that mushrooms, often referred to as nature's hidden gems, offer vitamins and minerals that complement balanced meals. For those prioritizing efficiency, there's no complicated technique involved. Simply saute and season, ensuring that flavor remains front and center. This straightforward approach underscores the accessibility of an ageless favorite. No advanced culinary training required. Tell us which of Grandma's dinners you remember, then like, subscribe, and keep the memories cooking in the comments below.